the way forward? Is the Democratic Republic of Congo still submerged in this catastrophic conflict? As the Rwanda-backed M23 rebels expand their control over eastern DRC, the situation is becoming one of the deadliest conflicts in Africa. Since January, an estimated 7,000 people have been killed, and humanitarian crisis has reached alarming levels. With entire towns emptied as civilians flee the violence, can the international community step in before the country plunges into deeper chaos? This and many more will be explored in today's Flash News. Good evening and welcome. I am Tabitha Ako. Let's begin. Today, bringing you updates from the ongoing war in Congo. The Democratic Republic of Congo is at a dangerous crossroad as M23 rebels, allegedly backed by Rwanda, continue their rapid territorial gains. Government forces are crumbling under pressure and humanitarian crisis is reaching catastrophic levels. Since the outbreak of this war and the takeover of key cities by M23 rebels, hundreds and thousands have been killed and forced to flee their homes. A pathetic situation it is for the victims of the war. Well, recently, in a progressive turn of event at a high-level UN meeting in Geneva, DRC Prime Minister Judith Suminwa Toluka described the severity of the crisis, calling for urgent international intervention. She spoke about witnessing the unimaginable proportions of humanitarian disaster that has displaced over 450,000 people in just a few weeks, calling the world to act before it is too late. M23 rebels have seized two major cities in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, Goma and Bukavu, cutting off vital supply routes and leaving civilians trapped in desperate situations. Food, water, and medical supplies are running out, and hospitals are overwhelmed with casualties. Reports from humanitarian organizations confirm that at least 3,000 people have been killed in Goma alone. In Bukavu, 3 children were executed last week by M23 fighters, sparking further outrage. The DRC government has repeatedly accused Rwanda of supporting the M23 rebels, applying and supplying them with weapons, troops, and logistics. Patrick Muyaya, DRC's communication minister, was firm in his accusations. We have undeniable evidence that Rwanda is fueling this war. Their troops are on our land and they are responsible for the deaths of innocent Congolese civilians, he stated. Well, the United Nations has also pointed fingers at Kigali, with multiple reports confirming that Rwanda has been backing M23. However, Rwanda President Paul Kagame has strongly denied these allegations, calling them Western propaganda. Aimed at destabilizing his country, we are not involved in this conflict, Kagame insisted. The DRC should take responsibility for its internal problems instead of blaming its neighbors. While Rwanda maintains that it has no involvement, many analysts believe that the conflict is not just about security concerns, it's also about controlling the DRC's vast mineral wealth. Eastern Congo is home to some of the world's richest deposits of gold, coltan, and cobalt minerals essentials for the global technology industry. Well, could it be a subtle encroachment into the nation's economic gain rather than a political play? A lot of people are being killed and displaced. And one of the most shocking developments in the conflict so far is the collapse of the DRC's own security forces. In Bukavu, 1,800 Congolese police officers surrendered to the rebels and are now being trained under M23's command. Lawrence Kanyuka, M23 spokesperson, confirmed the report. More than 500 additional officers are expected to join us soon. The Congolese state has failed its own people, he said. Take a look at the video on your screen. The Congolese police right there. Imagine an intense turn of event right there. The police are voluntarily surrendering to the M23 rebels. Could it be that they have been poorly treated and are there no reforms to their advantage? Or are they just afraid for their lives and future? Will this plunge the nation into more chaos, or is it freedom at play? On the contrary, President Felix Tshisekedi, facing mounting pressure, has called for military deserters to return and has announced plans to reform a unity government. We must stand together as a nation, he urged. This is not just about me, this is about the future of our country. We need unity, not more than ever. Despite Tshisekedi's call for national unity, the situation on ground remains dire. M23 has openly declared its next target, Kinshasa, the capital. The group has vowed to overthrow Tshisekedi's government and install its own leadership. The war in the DRC is no longer just a national crisis, it is threatening to destabilize the entire region. The violence has triggered one of the largest refugee crises in Africa, with more than 40,000 people fleeing into neighboring Burundi in the past month alone. In a single day, 9,000 refugees crossed the border, overwhelming aid agencies and local government. Well, what is the US saying? What is the African Union saying? The African Union has called for immediate peace talks, but diplomatic efforts have been repeatedly failed. A ceasefire agreement brokered last year collapsed within a month, and neither the DRC nor Rwanda appears willing to compromise. Western governments have condemned the violence, yet no meaningful intervention has been made. The United Nations has urged both sides to engage in dialogue, but past peace efforts have done little to halt the bloodshed. The stakes could not be higher. If the DRC's government collapses, the consequences could be catastrophic for the entire African continent. With M23 rebels tightening their grip on the country, Rwanda's involvement under scrutiny, and international mediation failing, the situation is reaching a critical point. Many civilians remain trapped in a war that has shown no possible signs of ending. Well, as international intervention persists, we hope that President Trump in the coming days pays priority to the current wars, especially in Rwanda and in Africa. Still on the report, just in moving over to Israel. For the first time in 2 decades, Israeli tanks have entered Palestinian cities in the West Bank, making a dramatic escalation in one of the world's most volatile regions. This development signals a shift in Israeli military strategy, raising concerns about the long-term future of the occupied territory. While much of the world remains focused on the fragile ceasefire in Gaza, the situation in the West Bank is reaching a boiling point. Since Hamas' October 7th attack, Israeli military operations in the West Bank have intensified, with over 1,000 Palestinians killed and tens of thousands displaced. Now, with tanks rolling into cities like Jenin and Nablus, many fear that Israel is preparing for a prolonged occupation. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz confirmed that the military presence will be extended for at least a year, preventing displaced Palestinians from returning to their homes. Today, I instructed the IDF to prepare for an extended presence in declared camps for the next year and not to allow the return of residents and the resurgence of terror, Katz stated. The statement has drawn widespread criticism, with accusations that Israel is engaging in forced displacement. Many see this as a part of a broader plan to reshape the West Bank's demographic. Similarly to the controversial Gaza explosion plan proposed by U.S. President Donald Trump. For years, Israel has conducted military raids into Palestinian cities claiming to target militants, but since October 7th, the frequency and intensity of these operations have increased significantly. Airstrikes, once rare in the West Bank, have become a common tactic. Entire neighborhoods have been demolished and checkpoints have been tightened, severely restricting Palestinian movement. Jenin, long regarded as a center of Palestinian resistance, has been one of the hardest hit areas. In January, Israeli forces launched one of their largest operations in the city, cutting off basic utilities and forcing thousands to flee. Jenin Mayor Mohammed Jarar condemned the assault, calling it a political strategy disguised as a security operation. This is not just about fighting militants, Jarar said, it's about shifting demographics, expanding settlements, and making life impossible for Palestinians. Well, is it true? Israeli officials, however, insist that military action is strictly about security. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar defended the operation, saying there are no other objectives here except eliminating terrorists. Despite these claims, it is argued that Israel is using military operations as a pretext for broader territorial expansion, pointing to the increasing number of Israeli settlements in the West Bank. Meanwhile, the escalation in the West Bank cannot be viewed in isolation from the political changes in Washington. Since President Trump's re-election, far-right Israeli ministers have renewed their push for annexation of the territory. Trump has not ruled out supporting annexation, stating earlier this month, "People do like the idea, but we haven't taken a position on it yet. We'll make an announcement in the coming weeks." So, well, we look forward to the coming weeks, and then we see how this can be progressed. This has emboldened Israeli hardliners like Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who oversees West Bank settlement expansion. Trump's victory is an opportunity for Israel, Smotrich declared. The only way to remove the threat of a Palestinian state is to apply Israeli sovereignty over all settlement. Smotrich has also been pressuring Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to resume military action in Gaza, while simultaneously intensifying crackdowns in the West Bank. The presence of Israeli tanks in Jenin marks a significant turning point in the conflict. The last time tanks rolled into the West Bank was in 2002 during the Second Intifada, a violent Palestinian uprising against Israeli rule. On Friday, Netanyahu visited Jenin, praising Israeli troops for eliminating terrorists and posing for photos inside a Palestinian home that the military had converted into a command center. 2 days later, the Israel Defense Forces announced the deployment of tank platoons, a move suggesting that ground troops and airstrikes were no longer considered sufficient. Humanitarian organizations are raising alarms over the growing crisis. The International Committee of the Red Cross issued a statement on Monday warning of dire conditions for displaced Palestinians. Displaced civilians in the northern West Bank require urgent assistance. Many are struggling to access clean water, food, shelter, and medical care. The ICRC reiterates that the population must be treated humanely and protected from violence. Despite international criticism, Israel appears unmoved. Trump's administration continues to support Israel's hardline policies, while the Biden administration has largely remained silent, avoiding direct condemnation. The situation in the West Bank is evolving rapidly. The return of tanks, the expansion of Israeli settlements, and the push for annexation all point to a prolonged military presence. With diplomatic efforts stalled and tensions at an all-time high, the region is at risk of descending into a deeper crisis. Well, the coming weeks will be crucial in determining whether the West Bank becomes another long-term conflict zone or if diplomatic pressure can de-escalate the situation before it spirals further out of control. Well, moving over to a report. It's been a consistent update on the issues surrounding Russia and Ukraine peace talks. In a strategic visit recently to Washington, French President Emmanuel Macron's high-level talks warned against any peace deal that amounts to Ukraine's surrender, while U.S. President Donald Trump claimed that Russian leader Vladimir Putin is willing to accept European peacekeepers as part of an agreement. But with shifting alliances and conflicting narratives, is this truly a step toward peace? Or is Ukraine being pressured into a deal that benefits everyone but itself? The contrast between Trump and Macron's position on Ukraine was evident throughout the meeting. Speaking from the White House, Trump declared that Putin wants to make a deal and that he has no problem with European peacekeepers. Trump reiterated his administration had already made more progress in the past month than the previous administration did in 3 years. While that is true, let's move forward. Macron, however, was more reserved, emphasizing that any deal must uphold Ukraine's sovereignty. This peace must not mean a surrender of Ukraine, Macron stressed. It must not mean a ceasefire without guarantees. His remarks hinted at a deep concerns in Europe over Trump's approach, especially given his previous statement blaming Ukraine for the war and branding President Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator. One of the most heated moments of the meeting came when Trump claimed that Europe was merely loaning money to Ukraine and getting repaid. Unlike the U.S., Macron, visibly frustrated, interrupted President Trump, placing his hand on Trump's arm and correcting him. No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort. Trump brushed off the remarks, reiterating his stance that the U.S. has been taken advantage of in supporting Ukraine. His administration has been pushing for a minerals revenue sharing agreement with Kyiv, seeking financial returns on U.S. military aid. We are very close, Trump said, referring to the minerals deal. Zelensky may come in this week or next week to sign the agreement. However, Zelensky, has resisted Washington's demand for $500 billion in mineral wealth as repayment. I'm not signing something that 10 generations of Ukrainians are going to pay later, he said last week. Trump also left the door open for territorial concessions to Russia, responding vaguely when asked if Ukraine should cede land. We'll see, he said, suggesting that negotiations were just beginning. Well, let's take a look.
It also gives us something where I think it's very beneficial to their economy, to them as a country. But, we're in for $350 billion. How we got there, I don't know, but that's a lot of money, a lot of money invested, and we had nothing to show for it. And it was the Biden administration's fault. The Europeans are in for about $100 billion, and they do it as in the form of a loan. And the Europeans have been great on this issue. They understood it wasn't fair, and we were able to work something out. But with the Ukrainians, I think I can say that we're very close. Scott's around here someplace, and I think we can say that we're very, hi Scott, I think we're very close. Do you have something to say about that?
This war costed all of us a lot of money. And this is the responsibility of Russia, because the aggressor is Russia. So at the end of the day, this frozen asset should be part of the negotiation, all in all.
Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money. To be clear,
yeah.
We have 230 billion frozen assets in Europe, Russian assets, but this is not as a collateral of a loan because this is not our belonging. So they are frozen. If at the end of the day, in the negotiation we will have with Russia, they're ready to give it to us.
President Trump right there and President Macron right there at the meeting. President Trump is working on an economic agreement. He is keeping his stance with not letting anything go without something to gain. We bring the peace deal, you sign a deal for rare earth minerals. Nothing goes for nothing. That's the first America agenda right there, Moving forward, still on the report, Macron's visit comes at a time of growing unease in Europe over Trump's shifting stance on the war. European leaders have pushed for continued military support to Ukraine, while Trump has emphasized diplomacy and economic agreement. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is expected to meet with Trump later this week to discuss the implications of Washington's evolving position. In other development, a move that further deepened concerns, the U.S. voted against European-backed UN resolution condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Instead, Trump's administration advanced its own resolution, which took a more conciliatory stance toward Moscow. The shift in U.S. policy has left European allies questioning whether Washington is aligning itself so closely with Russia. Is it a risky gamble? Trump seems to sound quite optimistic. Well, let's see how this unfolds in the coming days. Sheldon Whitehouse, a Democratic senator who attended the recent Munich Security Conference, condemned the vote. This is a disgrace, he said. Trump's senseless betrayal of the alliances that have kept Americans safe since World War II and his fealty to the murderous aggressor Putin are a national security threat. Meanwhile, Putin himself signaled openness to European involvement in negotiations. Not only European countries but other countries too have the right and can take part, he said. In a televised interview, the remarks suggest that Moscow may be willing to engage in broader talks, though skeptics argue this could be a tactic to stall further Western support for Ukraine. Despite Trump's optimism, significant obstacles remain. Any peace deal must navigate complex security concerns, economic interests, and geopolitical rivalries. Will Ukraine be forced to accept terms dictated by larger powers, the superpowers, or will it secure a lasting peace on its own terms? Macron's cautious approach highlights the risks of rushing into an agreement without safeguards. We want peace swiftly, he said, but we don't want an agreement that is weak. With more meetings expected between global leaders, the future of Ukraine hangs in the balance. Will Europe's concern be heard, or is Trump determined to strike a deal no matter the cost to Kyiv? Well, coming to the climax of this report, Ukraine seems to be in the fence. The grasshopper tossed by superpowers. It's been a pressured season for Zelensky. The question still remains, how does he intends to strike a balance while the stakes are higher and the aim remains for a peace deal? Nothing still goes for nothing. Probably at the expense of Ukraine's economy that has well gone down the drain for these past years. As peace talks continue, we hope Ukraine doesn't regret it's been a waste of time all along. Until next time, this is where we'll be drawing the curtain on today's Flash News. Remember, tonight we're bringing you recent reports at the home front with only Okpala at the top of the hour, 8 p.m. Until then, do have a pleasant day.